We are coming on that air with that massive breaking news coming out of Russia right now, where there are reports of some kind of a coup attempt with the leader of the Wagner mercenary group, I should say, accused of mutiny. An arrest warrant has been issued for him. These details really sketchy and a lot of them unverified coming in right now. But again, an arrest warrant has been issued for the Wagner mercenary group boss, which is obviously coming into play right now because they've been out there, they've been fighting on the battlefields, and it's not unusual. He's clashed with the Russian Defense Ministry and Russian defense officials before, but what is clearly going on here is they've almost turned around. They're not in Moscow yet. We're not going to say that yet, but certainly as it stands right now, there is quite a lot of action going on the ground, and it's continuing to develop for us. And we've got our National Affairs Editor, Austin Pollock, here to guide us through some of this coverage this afternoon. Austin, good afternoon to you. What do we know about what is going on?
Yeah, good afternoon, Leo. Great to be here. Well, the head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group, he said he's vowed to go all the way to topple Russia's military leadership. And it just comes hours after the Kremlin accused him of an armed rebellion. Now, he claims that the Kremlin actually shot dead a whole heap of his troops. This was about 12 hours or so ago. And this has sort of kicked off this whole situation that we have here. And he's Russia's general is now accusing the Wagner leader of attempting an actual coup. Now, we have heard within the past few moments a lot of reports coming out of Russia, and I'm sure, as you can see on your screen at the moment, there's actually at I think it's the Russian military headquarters. Russia's forces are lined up with guns, lined up at the Wagner mercenaries. Now, we have also heard from Moscow mayor. He says counter-terrorism measures are being taken to reinforce security and public events may be restricted. And Russia are certainly, as they have been doing, especially with this Ukraine war, and what we've seen, they are censoring a fair bit of content and as such, and they've actually just censored Google News, which is making it even harder for people there to actually know what's going on. We've also heard from the Rostov general governor, quote, "Due to the current situation, please refrain from traveling to the city center. If possible, don't leave your homes." And we've seen tanks, they've been rolling through the city into Moscow, as you can see from that footage that we're playing at the moment. And Russia's state news agency has confirmed that Wagner forces are near the military headquarters in Rostov. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's certainly a massive situation. Could we even see a coup? They of course they have been accused of that, as I was just saying, but the Wagner leader has said, quote, "This is not a military coup, but a march for justice, and he will fight to the end, Leo." So it's certainly a very much developing situation. Could we see a coup? What's going to happen next? We'll keep that all coming through to you.
It's pretty extraordinary what is going on right now, and it as we say, it continues to develop. In regards to, as you were just saying, in Rostov-on-Don, in Russia, all public events cancelled, according to the governor, but soldiers there taking positions. So that's where the action, I guess you could say, is taking place right now. And you're continuing to see some of that footage that is coming in, and we stress it's not been fully verified by 6 News, but this is what's been seen on social media. You can clearly see troops, you can see action, and it all points to a coup. It does point that way. I mean, well, you know, to play off an old saying, if it looks like a coup, if it smells like a coup, it probably is a coup. And that's what seems to be happening. I mean, the amount of military vehicles you're just seeing in just some of this footage right now is quite extraordinary, to say the least. Now, here's what you need to know. Again, the boss of the Russian mercenary group, Wagner claims his troops have marched into Russia from Ukraine. I think that's pretty evident based on the reports and the footage we're seeing right now. He's been accused of calling for an armed mutiny. Russia has now issued an arrest warrant against him. We know he's previously clashed with the Russian defense minister over perceived problems on the battlefield because, again, we can't forget they are currently fighting Ukraine in the war. And that seems to have just been totally thrown out and forgotten because it's Russia turning back on Russia. Now, arguably most extreme case here, other than a coup, is a possible civil war. Now, we're not getting to that stage yet, but obviously there's heightened security in Moscow, and obviously what's happening in Rostov-on-Don, which is again where I say the action is right now. Now, Austin, it seems like the social media is just going completely abuzz right now with this, and it's been trending right now worldwide. And we're again, it's obviously harder to tell because it's reports coming out of Russia, but you're just seeing this video continuing to come in, and it looks like it's going to keep developing.
Yeah, it is, and we're seeing from media sources and actually journalists on the ground and residents on the ground. This is the footage we're getting, so obviously, it's not high quality footage. It's somewhat unverified, but we have seen it spread right across social media. It's number one on trending worldwide at the moment, and obviously, how do I get this name right? Protogin says his units were hit by a helicopter on the Moscow highway and he's threatening to destroy everything in his way. But what's really a turning point from this relationship is the Wagner group leader was once known as I quote, Putin's chef. This is according to the BBC. The leader of the Wagner group, who has been now accused of calling for armed conflict in Russia, was once a catering business owner, so known for his government events, and he was called Putin's chef. So it's quite a change in relationships. Obviously, Putin has been briefed on this and would no doubt be somewhat leading this charge to have President prosecuted, as we've seen now, an investigation into him. So it's quite a turn of events for someone who has been fighting alongside Putin to now be fighting against Putin and his forces, as we've seen with the National Guard called out today also.
Yeah, and Austin, we've just seen those breaking news reports coming in from journalists on the ground that the Wagner group may have shot down a Russian military helicopter around midway in terms of a geographical point between Rostov-on-Don and Moscow, and that's halfway through, and I think it's a fair few hours away, so it seems they may be getting closer to Moscow right now, which obviously for non-Wagner officials in Moscow, alarm bells would be ringing right now if they weren't already. Nothing from Putin, by the way. Nothing from Russian President
Only from his
Vladimir
so
Putin.
far.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing. He's known for addresses.
Correct.
So nothing there yet. May not even have anything until it's all contained, if it is contained. But again, just hearing that a Russian military helicopter may have been shot down in the past few minutes by Wagner forces, which it's unverified, we stress, but
and this is
wouldn't
coming
surprise
from
me.
the Wagner chief himself, not actually. We haven't seen many actual accounts of that. He is saying that. So whether or not that is true, but it's highly likely to be, considering what we've seen from the ground today. But he's saying he's 25,000 strong force ready to die. So obviously he's not holding back at all.
No, absolutely not. And this is again, we still don't know a lot about what's going on right now. We're hearing some mixed messaging, and obviously, we're taking the word of Wagner and then also of Russian government officials at the same time. But still, we don't. The security is really being tightened in Moscow. But again, there is an arrest warrant out for him. But he's saying he's just going to keep leading his troops right now. Again, what this also means, we can't forget, if they're moving towards Russia, that means they're out of Ukraine, and may as well just put the Ukraine war on hold for the Russians at this point, because they seem to be fighting themselves, which again worst case for the Russians could lead to a civil war. Again, we're not getting to that stage yet, but still, it's quite evident, and you're just seeing that footage on your screen now, just the amount of military forces. And this is footage that if you didn't know, you'd think, okay, so this is coming out of Ukraine, that they're moving into Ukraine. No, it absolutely isn't. They've essentially turned around here and gone back to Russia, and they're moving
Yeah.
straight into Moscow, potentially.
Yeah, correct. And but I will say there was a breaking report earlier from the AFP news agency that there were air defenses operating in Kiev, but it certainly slowed down a lot. And a lot of reports out of there is that there hasn't been a lot of action for quite some time now, obviously, because Wagner forces have been helping with this war, but now they're not there. And then of course the Kremlin's men also not there. So it will certainly take the spotlight away and take it over to Russia itself in fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Austin, stay on the line for us. In a second, we're going to bring in our GovCheck editor and host of Between Parks Place and Capitol Hill, Stuart Jeffrey. So stay on the line for us. But again, for those of you watching at home, if you've got thoughts, if you've got something you want to say, if you've got questions on what is going on right now, and of course, there's still a lot about what is going on right now that we don't necessarily know, let us know. We will be trying to do our best to answer your questions and your comments, because there is a lot that we have to unpack here. So again, we will do our best to kind of bring in the coverage for you and establish what is going on, because still a lot that we don't know, but we do encourage your thoughts, your comments about what is going on. Again, if you are just joining us, an arrest warrant has been issued for the Wagner mercenary group boss after claims of mutiny leveled at him by Russian officials amid reports of a coup attempt, and it appears Wagner may be moving closer towards Moscow, and that is where we know security has been tightened in the past couple of hours. This is exploding right now on social media. We're getting more footage out of there. We stress a lot of this is unverified, and we are doing our best to make sure everything stays factual here. But these are reports coming in from the ground in Russia right now, and from journalists there, and this is where the footage is coming from as well. We've got Austin Pollock back, our national affairs editor. This is quite extraordinary, and again, I'll say it again, that we know Putin hasn't responded officially. We've just gone through his spokesperson, but Austin, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't hear anything for quite some time.
He's quite a man famous for all his addresses, especially during this the Ukraine war. He was constantly making addresses as well. But we might not hear anything for some time until this settles down. Obviously, if he says something, that could fire the whole thing up between Wagner and the Wagner group, and of course, then also the Kremlin. But it's certainly something that we would expect Vladimir Putin would have to address, especially if this does escalate further within the coming 48 hours.
The Wagner boss just said, by the way, half the Russian army is ready to join him. So, maybe we won't hear a Putin address. Maybe he'll be removed. We don't know. That is speculating. We do want to bring in now Stuart Jeffrey, the host of Between Parks Place and Capitol Hill here on 6 News, also the editor of GovCheck, which you can read now on the 6 News website, sixnewsau.com. Stuart, good afternoon to you. So this has all really started to play out in the past few hours, but pretty extraordinary what is going on and the reports that we're getting from the ground.
Exactly, and this is not unprecedented in Russia. Of course, going back to 1991. You've got the August coup, for example, which I believe Putin was pretty supportive of, and that was, of course, a coup attempt to reinstate a hardline Soviet rule. So Putin is not new to these coup attempts. He's been involved or he's supported them before, so it is going to be hard to dislodge him, even if Wagner has half of the military. It's still half of the military that Putin controls, along with some of the more hardline paramilitaries as well, which we've got to factor in. and generally, it's quite hard to beat the Soviet government or the Russian government. Of course, there's a running joke that you can't invade Russia during the winter, although of course it is summer there right now. But nonetheless, it's going to be a very hard fight if they want to try and dislodge Putin from office.
Yes, on the more local level, in terms of, I know because they're not in Moscow right now, and they're in Rostov-on-Don, and it seems like they're starting to take control of Wagner there. Is it possible they could start to kind of move in and establish themselves there instead of just going straight for Moscow? Although we do stress there are reports already halfway to Moscow and have shot down a Russian military helicopter.
Well, the important thing for Rostov-on-Don, of course, is that it is pretty much on the Black Sea. So it does give them a naval port as well, which gives them a bit more freedom to move. It makes them a bit more powerful. So it is a key city in the area. So having control of Rostov as a power base definitely makes sense. Of course, it's also a massive supply depot for the war in Ukraine. So it's definitely a key city that the Wagner Group needs to control if they want to try and overthrow Putin.
Again, we stress that these are reports of a coup attempt, but as I said to Austin before, if it smells like a coup, if it looks like a coup, it probably is a coup, or at least an attempt at one. Again, is this something that, because they seem to, it's already been moving so fast. If they're starting to move into Moscow, so in terms of whether this would be a successful attempt or not, is that something we should know soonish? In relatively not that many hours, or is this something that's going to build over days and days?
I doubt that it'll be resolved quickly, unless they manage to somehow capture Putin or knock out Putin. I doubt that he'll surrender. Of course, we've got to remember that he's been in power for, 2 decades now. Of course, he actually at one point supposedly gave up power and put a puppet in place, but behind that puppet, he was pulling the strings. So Putin won't give up power easily. It will be a fight unless they can somehow get Putin himself, or whether that means assassinate him or capture him. Unless they can do that, which will also be hard to do, it will be a slog, probably.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, you just mentioned there, Putin, it's hard to imagine, or it's hard to think about modern Russia, or really just post-Soviet Russia, without thinking of Putin. He's been there as prime minister or president or puppet controlling for some time, and nearly the entire time, and it's been quite extraordinary, just how long he's been there, but less so just how long he's been there, but also just how influential he's been as well, because you can't doubt his influence at all in shaping things. And of course, this entire war in Ukraine just itself, which is continuing to unfold. We do have just in some new footage, and I'll bring it up in a second, from social media, which is showing a bit of smoke, it appears, and also, again, this is coming in with those other reports of a Russian military helicopter being shot down. We have some unverified footage. Austin, you know a bit about this. What can you tell us from this footage that, again, we stress is unverified, but it is just coming in the past few minutes?
Yeah, this is footage just into the newsroom. There's heavy fighting. Apparently, this is all unconfirmed. Obviously, we're getting this off social media, as you've said, but apparently there's heavy fighting with helicopters. This person who has actually captured this footage, which I'm not 100% sure if we're showing right now, it's of the smoke in Rostov. They're saying they've seen about half a dozen or videos showing fighting over there in the last couple of hours, and that's where that smoke is coming from, near the military base there. And it would appear there are quite a lot of smoke and military movements in Russia's. Sorry, this is the Voronezh region.
None of us are
It's
Russian
unclear
speakers.
what's
I'll preface that, but yeah.
No. Yeah. So So obviously they're moving in, and they're moving in quickly, and this is obviously some destruction that's taking place. Of course, all unconfirmed, but this footage is just taken to social media right now and taken from social media right now. But I just want to say something before, as you were talking about with Vladimir Putin. So he's been serving continuously as either a president or prime minister since 1999.
Quite an extraordinary figure, and you think about how fast our leaders come and go in Australia. So it's extraordinary there. We do have that footage on screen for those wanting to see. We'll take it off in a second, but it's only a short clip, but it's certainly indicating some kind of fighting there. And when you hear about reports that a Russian helicopter's been shot down, a military helicopter, it's kind of adding to that. And the fact Wagner appears to be fighting right now. I don't have the time. Someone can probably check. I don't have the time right now, local Moscow time, but they're waking up. And they're waking up to something quite extraordinary. Stuart,
7:30 a.m.
7:30 a.m. Right. So Stuart, this is again, it seems to be moving fast. And again, the other reports that we saw were that Wagner troops were halfway between Rostov-on-Don and Moscow, and that is it's quite a few hours drive between there. So they seem to be moving quite fast, even though this doesn't seem like it'll be resolved that fast.
Exactly. Well, they need to try and get to Moscow as fast as they can. Of course, it is the center of Russia. Of course, it was moved from the capital was moved from St. Petersburg to Moscow because it was a more central location. Of course, back at the start of the last century. So definitely, the faster they get to Moscow, the more likely they will succeed in their coup attempt.
Some more breaking reports, by the way. Wagner is apparently claiming that Russia's chief of general staff has fled the Ministry of Defense headquarters in Rostov-on-Don and is trying to hide in his friend's apartment in the city. And this is where a lot of the footage you're seeing on screen now is coming out of Rostov-on-Don. I stress that pronunciation's probably wrong. But Wagner apparently already celebrating there. And so they're moving in. I talked about this earlier, Stuart, and again, it is pure speculation. But if this is something that really isn't resolved soon, is this something that could lead to a potential civil war in Russia?
Yeah, well, I think one aspect that if this is more of it's not certain. I'll give you that much. But if there's a chance that the coup attempt will succeed, I think one thing we'll see is the Caucasus will see a lot of uprisings. Of course, the most famous semi-autonomous republic there is Chechnya. A lot of these republics have tried to get for freedom in the past, and they were put down by Putin. So, if there's a likelihood that this could succeed, we could see further republics or autonomous regions try and assert themselves. This is unprecedented. Again, back when we had the August coup in 1991, that led to many countries like Azerbaijan and Georgia and Armenia and the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. They used that coup attempt to try and gain independence, and they, of course, were successful. So we could see further autonomous regions split from Russia if this succeeds.
The Russian stock exchange, the Moscow stock exchange, I should say, appears to be collapsing right now. I just saw something on Yahoo Finance, and it's down quite heavily. Could be affected or could be just pretty much stopped soon enough, depending on how things continue to unfold. And again, you're seeing this unverified video coming out, but it appears Wagner's moving quite fast. What about, Stuart, what about Ukraine here? Because we can't forget the whole reason this is happening is because of this Ukraine conflict. But if Wagner's moving out of Ukraine, I mean, this could only mean good things for the Ukrainian officials. I mean, Zelensky wouldn't be too opposed to troops leaving the country to go fight Russia themselves?
Yeah, even if the coup attempt fails, which is, again, it is possible that the coup attempt here will fail. We do not know for certain that it will succeed. If it fails, this is still pulled off the army off of the border. Again, we're talking about the Wagner group taking control of Rostov-on-Don, which is a major supply depot for the war in Ukraine. If they manage to take that, and they're moving a bit further up north, of course, you've got Voronezh as well, which is another supply base. The supply base. It's more closer to north Ukraine. If they can take these two bases, even temporarily, that will disrupt Russian forces who are fighting Ukraine right now. And of course, if their coup attempt leads to civil war, that Russian army needs to get pulled off of the Ukrainian border. And we could very well see Ukraine taking that. I like looking at historical parallels. Back at the end of World War One, of course, Russia had a civil war then, and that was used by Germany to kind of force a peace deal that forced the Russians to give up much of their land because they were fighting a civil war. We could see that happen here. We could see Ukraine even try and reassert its control over Crimea, which was taken by the Russians in 2013, 2014. So depending on how violent the coup attempt is when it leads to the civil war, we could very well see Ukraine take out these two Russian-backed oblasts in Ukraine that are asserting independence, and we could see Ukraine take back Crimea, which is definitely a possibility here should there be a civil war.
And of course, I mean, again, even if it doesn't extend to a civil war, the fact is that the Wagner troops are out, and if they want to keep fighting Ukraine, they've got to go back in, so they're going almost square one at this point. Which is, again, extraordinary to think about. We've got some more developing news peers relating to Ukraine. Let's bring back in our national affairs editor, Austin Pollock. Austin, what have you got for us?
Leo, according to CNN, Russia's defense ministry has said that Ukraine's concentrating troops in Bakhmut right now amid Prigozhin's, quote, provocation. So, obviously, because Rostov-on-Don is home to Russia's Southern Military District Command, it's likely it is that place is key to Russia's war efforts against Ukraine. So, if Russia are going to start Ukraine rather are going to take advantage of this, this is certainly the time to do it, and it looks like they already are, according to this report from the Russian Defense Ministry.
Yeah, while Russia's distracted, they might move in, and not. I mean, that's probably the best thing they can do, really, at this point for what is extraordinary and what does continue to unfold as they approach 8 a.m. over in Moscow. And again, if you're just joining us, I want to recap kind of what you do need to know here, because there is a lot that is unfolding right now. Again, the boss of Russian mercenary group Wagner has claimed his troops have marched into Russia from Ukraine, which is evident from the footage you have been seeing on screen, and we'll bring back up shortly. An arrest warrant's been issued for him, and he's been accused of calling for an armed mutiny. And he's been known to previously clash with the Russian defense minister and Russian defense officials over problems and perceived losses on the battlefield. And this probably isn't helping that now that they are almost abandoning the battlefield at this point. They are leaving the battlefield in Ukraine, and now they're fighting something over in Russia, and it appears again they are starting to move towards Moscow. It's a while, I think someone said 6-hour difference, but if they're halfway there, it could be moving super fast at this point, and by about 6 o'clock tonight, I mean, you imagine the situation could develop even further. But if we just bring that footage back on screen for you now, there it is. You can just see the amount of military action going on, and you've got the people on the streets. I mean, they're just filming it, and that's where we're getting all this footage from. So we appreciate them filming it, because that is how we are finding all of this out. But it is quite extraordinary to see. It is quite extraordinary to see, as Stuart said, not unique to Russia, and especially not in the past year. In that general region, it's not unusual to see. But Stuart, realistically, we could see if Wagner does indeed move forward, they could be moving to Moscow again by like 6 o'clock tonight.
Definitely, and of course, if they manage to take Moscow, that's the main rail hub for all of the for all of Russia, and of course, control of Moscow also kind of cuts off Vladivostok and Siberia from the rest of Russia. So that's definitely an issue that the Russian government and Vladimir Putin need to be considering right now. Of course, taking Moscow doesn't guarantee a success for the coup attempt. They need to get Putin. Otherwise, it will probably be a civil war that we'll look at right here, or the coup attempt will fail.
But of course, Putin, is he more of a man who would flee this kind of situation if it really became inevitable that Wagner was about to have a successful coup here? Or what could we potentially see him doing? Again, stressing, apart from his spokesperson, he has been pretty much dead silent in the past few hours.
I don't believe we'll see him flee. He was a KGB colonel during the Soviet Union. KGB, of course, being their secret police, their version of the CIA. So I don't think we'll see him flee. He's probably a man who will stand and fight this. If he flees, it'll be just to another Russian city. He will not flee Russia. Of course, he probably even can't flee Russia because of the warrant against him from The Hague for war crimes. So he can't really flee.
Where could he
outside of
go theoretically? What, Belarus? Is that about it? China?
China will probably give him asylum. Belarus will, of course. There's the alliance BRICS, Russia, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then South Africa.
Although we do hear, I just remembered, by the way, sorry, Stuart, I do remember that apparently Lukashenko, his private plane or something like that, apparently trying to leave the area is what we've seen past few hours. Nothing verified there, but just go on. Yeah, it seems Putin does not have many allies here, really.
Belarus is pretty much a Russian puppet at this point. Just to go on a tangent here to use that. Belarus is, and as people here I haven't really spoken about in the media, Belarus, if Putin falls, then Lukashenko is gone. So Belarus, we could even see Belarus intervene in a civil war should a civil war break out, because Lukashenko is only in power because he's got Putin's backing. So if Putin goes, he goes. On top of that, you've also got the BRICS alliance, which benefits from having Putin in power, especially China, because China needs to have Putin because it kind of distracts the US. So China can, expand its power, especially in the South China Sea there. So Russia and China benefit from each other being powerful, because they can both put pressure on the US, and the US government has to split its attention and focus on both of them at the same point in time, at the same time. So that benefits Russia and China to have Putin in power. Of course, there's talk right now of Putin was meant to visit South Africa later this year, and of course, South Africa has legislation in place that they would have to give up Putin to The Hague for war crime trials should he step foot in their country. So he can't flee there right now. Because the South African government wants to take action on that and try and keep Putin in their country if he goes to visit there. But the opposition is opposed to that, and there will be international pressure on South Africa should they give him asylum. India probably won't. Again, they've got concerns with Pakistan being on their border, and they're a bit more reluctant to back Putin's government. And Brazil is a non-factor here. So really, he can flee. He might be able to flee to China or Belarus, and that's about it. There's nowhere else left for him to go.
Definitely limited options there. Continuing with that, with the international aspect of this, the US certainly, who have obviously been assisting Ukraine right throughout this war, especially the US and also the UK as well. Could we expect them to speak to something, or do you imagine they might just be waiting for their own kind of intelligence, to see what's going on, because we're getting these reports. A lot of them are unverified, but it's impossible to escape them at this point. This is what is on the ground right now.
If the problem for Russia, for the US in this instance is, you know, it's not like Wagner Group's leader. I can't speak Russian, so I forgot. But either way, the Wagner Group, they aren't exactly some democratic organization. They're also supernationalist. So for the US to try and back the Wagner Group, it's wouldn't she? But in fact, you could even argue that it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't, which could be used as an argument for them to come in and support the Putin's government. Although, of course, that won't happen. But it does show that they're also going to be reluctant to support the Wagner Group here. If we see any democratic groups pop up in this, they will probably receive backing from NATO, especially from the US. And again, I mentioned these Caucasus autonomous regions like Chechnya. We could definitely see intervention there, especially because Turkey has an interest in that region. So we could definitely see NATO support for those regions if they break out, or if a democratic group becomes a third player in that civil war or the coup attempt. That's where NATO will want to focus.
So you just mentioned there Wagner again. They're kind of annoyed here because of losses on the battlefield, but they're not like a anti-Putin resist democratic group, are they? Fundamentally for Russia, it would just be more military guys in power if this got to an extremely successful attempt for them.
In fact, the Wagner Group is more militaristic than Putin could be, because Putin's background isn't military, it's secret service. Wagner is military. So, if anything, if we have a fast coup attempt and they succeed, they won't leave Ukraine, I don't think. Unless we don't have figures for Russian losses, unless those figures are really high, I don't think we could see Wagner Group might not leave Ukraine.
Although at the same time, if this guy does become successful, because they are continuing to move closer to Russia, they would have to get back into Ukraine at this point, more than continue. They're going to have to, again, turn all the way back at this point. And you imagine that also, first and foremost, be dealing with taking control of the government, if again, they wanted that, and they wanted to fully move towards that. So, might be a while till, if again, assuming they were successful, they get back onto the whole matter of what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah, but you're also assuming that these groups are going to be rational actors. And given that they supported Putin invading Ukraine, I don't think they said that they're rational actors. So they are a bit of an unknown there. If I could take a tangent here for a second, one thing that anyone's talking about, I haven't seen anyone mention, is what happened to Edward Snowden. Because if the Russian government falls, Edward Snowden, of course, could lose his asylum. You could see him going the route of Julian Assange. So there is also talking about the US interest in it. The fall of Putin could be useful for them because they'll be able to get their hands back on Snowden. So there's actually an interest there for NATO and for the US. So there's definitely a lot of factors from outside players we need to consider here. It's not just Wagner Group and Putin and Ukraine. You've got US influence, NATO, Turkey, Belarus, China. All these other players we have to factor in. We can't treat the civil war here as an isolated event. It needs to be considered in the broader global context.
I just want to get to some breaking news now. The Wagner boss has appeared at the Russian military headquarters in Rostov-on-Don, and he is demanding to see the defense minister, is what we've evidently seen. Let's just bring that footage up now.
По нам стрелять, а мы их сбивать. Сбили? Третью. Собьем все, если вы будете их посылать. Потому что вы долбите по мирным жителям. Вы уничтожаете мирняк. Вы только что развалили автобус.
Again, that is the Wagner boss appearing at the Russian military headquarters in Rostov-on-Don. He is demanding to see the defense minister. Of course, probably unlikely those demands will be met right now, given it's a possible coup attempt right now. So that's happening. Yeah, so that's kind of the latest from on the ground. And I think that's the first time we've seen him pop up officially in the past few hours, but evidently he is there, and that's what's happening there. We know from apparently some reports on the ground that Wagner boss has issued some kind of orders to Defense Ministry commanders who have remained at the Southern Military District headquarters. That's in Rostov-on-Don or Rostovov. Same thing, and definitely he's there. So he is now appearing, and we could see him appear more. But again, the person who hasn't appeared throughout all of this is Vladimir Putin. Again, only his spokesperson has been the one to comment on this or say at least something. But again, still not getting much. And Russian state media is another thing. I don't know if any of us have RT Russia Today on, the English language state media, but would be interesting to see what they're saying about all this. In the meantime, we're going to continue following this. But certainly quite extraordinary. And Stuart, again, as you mentioned there, and I just going back to what you said before, the US, obviously a lot could arguably, be at stake for them here, but also just in general. Ukraine right now, they are probably just watching this unfold, and they've been apparently moving towards Bakhmut in the past few hours, given there's no more Russians there, or at least the Russians are moving out to go deal with the Russians.
Exactly. Russian civil war definitely benefits Ukraine here. As you pointed out, even if the coup attempt succeeds, they've still left the Ukrainian border. So this is definitely an opportunity for Ukraine to try and reassert itself and potentially force a beneficial peace deal that sees Russia give up control of Crimea. So there's definitely a benefit there for Ukraine as a civil war attempt. It doesn't matter who wins. Of the coup attempt of the civil war, it still gives Ukraine even just a 24-hour respite.
Anything else, yeah.
Even if it's a 24-hour respite, gives them time to try and reorganize and reinforce their front line. So any break they get, they will use.
And still, we've also just seen that the National Guard riot police are apparently mobilizing in Moscow. We know security was tightened, but apparently, again, they are halfway there. Wagner, alarm bells would have to be ringing here. A serious coup threat, I imagine. I mean, you can't not take this seriously. It's not just one rogue military guy. They are seriously moving towards Moscow here, and they're moving quite fast, maybe even sooner than the 6 p.m. I suggested.
Exactly. Of course, the National Guard of Russia being mobilized doesn't necessarily mean that Putin will succeed. Let's not forget, last year, I believe it was 115 National Guardsmen were fired from the National Guard. Of course, the National Guard answers directly to Putin. 115 were fired because they refused to take part in the war in Ukraine. So even the National Guard is split over the war in Ukraine. So we could literally see National Guardsmen fighting the Wagner group literally change sides in the middle of that conflict and back the Wagner group. So even the National Guard being mobilized doesn't mean that Putin will win. The Guard answers directly to him, but there is dissenting factions there. We don't know how far that goes. Again, it's going to be hard to dissent in that openly because it's run by Putin, and he famously hates dissenters. But the fact that 115 National Guardsmen were fired and then took that to court, they lost in court, of course, because Putin. But the fact that they even attempted to try and sue for unlawful termination of employment means that there are people in the National Guard and therefore also the riot police who we could see change sides.
And again, Wagner boss is claiming there are Russian forces on the ground in Ukraine who are apparently supporting him. Let's bring back in National Affairs Editor Austin Pollock. Austin, what have you got for us? And again, just mentioning that footage again for those who just missed it, that the Wagner boss is now demanding to speak to the Russian Defense Minister, and he is at the Rostov-on-Don military headquarters.
Yeah, Leo, and top military generals have told Wagner that they urge him to stop, or his group to stop. And in terms of the state TV, as well as we were talking about before, they've been airing special bulletins overnight. Obviously, of course, won't be telling the full story of course, there'll be some propaganda involved. So that's what's happening there. And the Kremlin is saying that Putin is receiving around-the-clock updates about what is going on. Now, a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, has told BBC News it is almost certainly an attempted coup. But this is serious for Putin. The Russians are taking it very seriously, and it sounds like they should. But he does say this, Bill Taylor, who again is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, says the Wagner boss is unlikely to succeed in this coup, but it is almost certainly, an attempted coup. And the Ministry of Defense Forces, they have equipment, they have aircraft, they have tanks, they have the military equipment in numbers to put down Wagner's forces, he does also say, Leo.
What do you make of that, Stuart? Because, I mean, we're speaking before they even get into Moscow, if they do. But, again, still the fact we're talking about a not exactly impossible successful coup attempt is it seems quite extraordinary, given, and again talking back to what we were discussing a few minutes ago, that Putin has just been there for so long. But it seems, this is a first genuine attempt that could actually change hands, or at least, if not severely impact Russia right now, and then probably help Ukraine by the fact that they're not fighting Ukraine.
If the Wagner Group manages to seize control of Moscow, they'll be the first power to control that city since Napoleon. So that kind of puts it in context in how big this is. If they can take control of Moscow, it's big. Of course, that won't guarantee they win, because Russia is famous for an approach to war where they give up land in return for gaining more time to organize. That's how they've fought World War One. That's how they fought World War Two. That's how they fought Napoleon. This kind of scorched earth tactic. The Russian people support the use of scorched earth tactics, which destroy resources ahead of advancing enemy forces. So taking Moscow won't guarantee that they win, but it definitely improves their chances of winning. We could see Putin decide to retreat to the east towards the Ural Mountains, which are on the edge of Europe. I believe they're actually the current European border is these Ural Mountains to the east, or we could see him go towards Finland and up on the coast there into the Baltic. Of course, the old capital there was St. Petersburg, which was eventually renamed to Leningrad, and now, of course, it's been named back to under Russia. It was, of course, its name was changed back to a version of its original name, I believe Petrograd. So there's an option there to retreat back up north. They could go east, they could go west towards Belarus, depending on how the Belarus government feels about this. So there are definitely ways that they could retreat. Let's not forget that Russia is the biggest country in the world.
Yeah, it's a huge country. Get back to that point in a sec, but we just got some breaking news. Austin, what have you got for us?
Yeah, Leo. So Wagner chief, he has now said that he is inside Rostov's army HQ and controls the city's military sites. That is what he is claiming. He has now managed to get his way inside. We do know there are currently his tanks are also pointed at that building to ensure security for him. So certainly a massive development. Now he controls the city's military sites, and he is now inside the Rostov's army headquarters.
Right, that is an important development there. Just going back, Stuart, so, yeah, Russia is big, so we could seriously see a situation where Wagner has control of Moscow, but they still haven't toppled Putin. Putin's still in control, and they're just kind of waiting it out to plan a response.
Well, if the Russian government moves back to St. Petersburg, that definitely gives us some options, because I do not believe the Wagner Group has much influence over the Russian Navy. So retreating back to St. Petersburg, or if they go further to the northeast, they've got Archangel on the border as well, there on the Arctic Sea, which is they don't have access there the whole year round. It's affected by ice, but the St. Petersburg has a warm water port that is accessible all year round, where much of the Russian Navy is based right now. Of course, Turkey would likely give the Russian Navy permission to leave the Black Sea for the Baltic Sea, because taking Rostov kind of deprives the Russian Navy of a strong port in the Black Sea. But definitely, they still have a naval presence in the Baltic Sea, up to the north. And of course, residing in St. Petersburg would give them a strong naval base to operate out of. Again, I say again, the Wagner Group is a land army. They do not have much of an air force, and even less influence in the navy. So sure, they may have half of the army, they claim, but they do not have the air force, or much of the air force, and they do not have any influence in the navy. There's more than one branch to the Russian army that we need to consider here. It's not just the army, military, with the navy and the air force and the National Guard.
Although, just as you say that, the Wagner boss is now claiming that the Rostov-on air base, he has control over now. That's the claim he's making. So maybe they've got that at least, but still, it's extraordinary to see what they're doing. And again, Moscow is bringing in anti-terror measures at this point. Have we seen in obviously everyone points back to 1991, but in modern post-Soviet Russia, have we seen anything possibly as close to a coup attempt as this, Stuart?
No, we have seen mass protests in favor of democracy. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we could see a third party get involved when the opposition party is getting involved and forming a democratic movement, which would likely get the backing of NATO. And that would definitely be throw a spanner in the works. And of course, the Democratic group wouldn't have much control in the military, but they would have NATO backing. And if NATO gets up against the Wagner group, NATO wins. So it's definitely an option there, but we have not had a coup attempt of anything close to this scale since 1991. And of course, going earlier than 1991, your earliest one is the October Revolution, and is looking at 1917, where you had two coup attempts, both succeeded, overthrowing the monarchy and then overthrowing the democratic government by the communists. So we've seen that's 1917, 1991. So there has been two major coups in the last century, but nothing since those.
Just some more breaking news right now. The Wagner boss is saying that if the Chief of the General Staff and Defense Minister don't come to him, Wagner will go to Moscow. And Stuart, I don't know about you, but I'm willing to bet they're not about to go to him. So, seems like they're going to go to Moscow.
Well, even if they go to him, even if the Chief of Staff and the Defense Minister went to the Wagner Group, I still think they'd go straight to Moscow anyway. Without Moscow, it's going to be hard for them to succeed in a coup attempt, because, of course, sure, they have Rostov, but that's not a. It's I believe it's the capital of the Rostov Oblast, which of course is the closest thing they have to a state or a territory. Although of course it's a lot less autonomous than a state or territory is in either Australia or the US. It's closer to a French province. So there is some administrative center in Rostov, but it is nothing compared to what they need if they want to try and form a new government. So they do need Moscow no matter what. So even if the defense minister came to them, they'll still probably go through Moscow anyway because they need that if they want to succeed in their coup attempt.
For those of you just joining us, recapping that breaking news right now, the boss of Russian mercenary group Wagner has claimed his troops, and it appears evident, have marched into Russia from Ukraine. He's been accused of calling for an armed mutiny by Russian officials, and Russia's now issued an arrest warrant against him. He has previously been known to clash with Russian Defense Ministry officials over problems on the battlefield. And this is essentially appearing to be a coup attempt. Again, smells like a coup, looks like a coup, probably is a coup. And this is developing in the past few minutes. It's just gone 3 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time, which would be, if my maths have me correctly, it's about 8 a.m. in Moscow, where anti-terror measures have been enforced and heightened security because of the possibility of a coup attempt. Of course, if Wagner did gain control of Moscow, that does not automatically equal a successful coup attempt. But the Wagner boss was just claiming in the past few minutes, if the Chief of General Staff and Defense Minister don't come to him, they will go to Moscow. They might not, but that being said, even if they do, we've already heard reports Wagner is halfway to Moscow right now in about 3 of 6 hour journey and have shot down a Russian military helicopter. So, Stuart, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Wagner boss was just talking shit there and they're already moving towards there. I mean, that's kind of the reports we're seeing, unverified, but they'd probably already been moving there right now, and it appears, well, maybe they're already halfway there.
Exactly. The problem with covering this civil war or this coup attempt by the Western media is you can't trust either side's media outlets. That's the problem we're all going to face.
No, we're not. Well, every second sentence is going to be unverified or Russian state media reports at this point. So we stress,
everything's allegedly.
Yes, and this footage again, it's unverified, but it'd be some damn good AI if it wasn't. In all seriousness, though, this does appear to be what is happening, and again, this is footage from the past few hours in Rostov-on-Don, where it appears that's the most Wagner's successfully moved in. Whether they are halfway to Moscow or not is up to unverified reports to decide. But apparently a Russian military helicopter shot down by Wagner with them halfway there, and that's kind of elevating. We saw some footage before. Let's just hopefully bring it back on screen now. Yeah, some smoke. There it is on screen for you now. Filmed by locals, which could indicate something happening. It does indicate something happening, but certainly a lot going on. And other footage also of the Wagner boss, who is at the military headquarters in Rostov-on-Don. That's where he's making these demands in the past few minutes, and is repeatedly making those demands, and is definitely wanting the defense minister and the chief of general staff to come to him. Whether they do or not remains to be seen. But evidently, yeah.
Do we know whether the Wagner Group leader is on the way to Moscow or if he's still in Rostov? Do we know where he is at this point?
Assuming videos from the past 15 minutes released were taken in the past 15 minutes or so, he is at the military headquarters in Rostov-on-Don. He is there. So he might be lagging behind a few other troops if they're moving towards Moscow already. He might. That is speculation, but who knows? But yeah, again, stressing a lot of this footage is also released by Wagner, Wagner affiliated groups and media. So we're trying to be careful here, but all indicates what we're trying to outline here. And again, Moscow has responded with anti-terror measures and a few statements, and according to Austin, who I'll get to in a moment, state media saying what he's claiming doesn't correspond to reality, and that very well may be true, but still, that's what we know. So Austin, again, going back to Russian state media, they're going to, they can't exactly deny it's all happening, but seems to be more of a he's not telling the truth situation here, isn't it?
Correct, and we're seeing that all through different channels of Russian state media. The Russia 24, another state TV channel, broke into programming on Friday night to broadcast a message from the Russian Ministry of Defense to say that what you said, dude. The Wagner mercenary group's leader claims do not correspond to reality, obviously taking steps to try and control that narrative. And that statement has been widespread rather through Russia, trying to get on control of all these reports that we're reporting on as well. Obviously, all these claims from Wagner and what we're seeing, what we're seeing, of course, right across social media, what we're seeing right across mainstream media, all these different reports. But obviously, there's no denying, as you said, there's no denying we're seeing footage. It can't be made up. You can't make this footage up. This is raw footage that we've gotten. It's definitely happening. There's no doubt it's happening, but obviously because it's coming, the sources are just basically Wagner himself and some people getting footage on the ground. You're not going to get the full story of what's happening, and obviously you got to find the middle ground.
And I don't think many Western journos are about to enter it either right now. It is a hostile situation. So we're getting reports, and there are some great journalists on the ground too who have been covering this and who obviously have connections and are getting some footage out. But it is hard to report all this when simply we don't know and we have very little ability to verify. What you're seeing on screen now is the most verified footage we've got, which is again of what's going on in Rostov-on-Don, and it's been happening in the past year. As you can see, just as they were waking up, that's just before sunrise earlier this morning, local time, and it has just gone 8 a.m. in Moscow, where anti-terror measures are heightened. Public events have been cancelled in Rostov-on-Don, and that's been in effect for about an hour. Stuart, could we see something like that in Moscow as well, where obviously much larger population and much more people to get inside if it did come to that point, or what could we see there?
It's definitely a possibility. We have seen the Russian government close the M4 highway. That is the highway that goes towards Voronezh, which is the equivalent of Rostov in the north above Ukraine. It's another major supply base. As I said earlier, that would be a target for the Wagner group. So the Russian government has closed that highway. We do not know if they've closed the highway that goes towards Rostov. It's a less direct route, certainly, but the Russian government is closing down its highways towards the south. So that definitely suggests they're taking this very, very seriously. So we could see similar events happen in Moscow. Of course, the governor of the Rostov Oblast did tell all citizens to stay inside when the Wagner group first turned up in Rostov. So we could very well see similar statements made in Moscow, although I doubt that will be followed because, again, as we've been seeing, this is a paramilitary mercenary organization, supposedly with the backing of half of the Russian army. Moscow has millions of citizens, unlike Rostov, so we could very well see riots or people leaving. And of course, if we see riots, I don't think the riot police that have been called in will distinguish between Moscow citizens and the military that is marching against them. I think the citizens will get caught in the middle of these two groups clashing, and it won't be good for either of them. And that's why I think we could see a democratic organization come out. Of course, the main democratic groups we have in Russia are more socialist, more left-wing, although there are a few more liberal organizations there. So we could definitely see a third party come into the civil war if the military or the riot police or the Wagner group starts going after civilians. So they have to be very, very careful about how they handle the situation in Moscow.
Yeah, Austin, we've also got a bit of more response from some international entities. What do we know about that?
Yeah, well, as we were talking about Ukraine before, an advisor to the country's presidential administration has tweeted, quote, "Tumultuous times are coming." And Ukraine's defense ministry has concisely tweeted, "We are watching." That they're very limited words, but that is the point of view that Ukraine is getting. As we heard also, they're moving their forces to Bakhmut, is what I think we heard before on CNN. And in the US, the White House has said that they're monitoring the situation and will be constantly consulting with allies and partners on these developments, according to a National Security Council spokesman. But it is certainly something that the world will be watching on as we're watching on here in Australia, and no doubt more responses to come from different national security agencies right across the world.
That demanding that the defence minister speaks to him. This was footage from Rostov-on-Don. He's at the military headquarters. This was released in the past few minutes on social media. Let's take a look.
По нам стрелять, а мы их сбивать. Сбили? Сбили. Третью. Собьем все, если вы будете их посылать. Потому что вы долго